it's by default always going to be more valid to exclude the perspectives of people whose positions and behaviors are necessarily anti-free expression themselves. So, like, for instance, I think it's a pro-free speech position to say we should censor Nazis on social media, for example, or far-right fasci types, because if you don't, and they exploit their presence on those systems to take power, which is what is currently happening, and also historically what has happened in other systems, then what you've done is you've gone ahead and destroyed free speech. If you care about protecting it, you have to, protect it against the forces inside of a society that would look to destroy it. Same, for example, with, you can be very much pro-peace, but that doesn't mean you can't go to war with, say, Nazi Germany or a country that threatens your peace. It's about managing threats to the systems that you believe in. I would always be in favor, I think, of deferential treatment towards anybody who's calling against, you say, I mean, for Jews and Nazis, for example. I mean, I don't think it's I don't think the paradox of tolerance is much of an issue to work around at all. I'm very okay with a bias in that respect.
I hear that. At the same time, I want to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Sure.
So David Cole made the argument. David Cole is like one of the legal directors of the ACLU. He made the argument that when we get to a point like Nazi Germany, there's no way in hell I would protect the speech rights of Nazis. Whereas Nadine Strawson, former president of the ACLU, said something along the lines of these speech codes that have been implemented in a large sense have empowered the Nazis in the first place. And not having had them, the counterfactual would be that we probably wouldn't get as far. I think in general, by sort of removing the debate from the domain of free speech and instead on the moral righteousness and wrongness of an action, you're almost better able to challenge pernicious, racist, sexist, transmisogynistic, anti-Semitic, more like biases. I just think that like most of the time these ideas don't succeed. And in censoring them, we sometimes push them to more extreme versions and further isolate these people.
Well, I don't know if we necessarily push the Nazis towards more extreme positions. I feel like they were going to do that anyway. If you take a look, for example, at how fascists behave in the US today, they'll take the "I've been censored" pledge, whether or not it's actually happened. There are conservative YouTubers who will scream about how they're being deprioritized online, when in reality, Facebook has shown that they're actually getting preferential treatment, like directly. They're actually privileged above the left. So it seems like the assumption of victimization is something that's just a part of their ideology. I would just say the state didn't go far enough. They arrested a few of the beer hall putsch types. I mean, Hitler had his little wannabe, but I mean, I'm not talking about a couple of years in the slammer for a beer hall putsch. If in 1929 Jews were running around with garrote wire and pistols in the Weimar Republic, killing off Nazi officials, it's undeniable that in a historical sense they would have saved quite a few lives. Now, obviously, we can't go around tactically carpet bombing every non-democratic stronghold, but I feel like the appeal to peaceful public resistance works until it doesn't. Because there was plenty of peaceful public resistance in the Weimar Republic as well, We saw it as well with the invasion of Iraq. Millions of people took to the streets. It affected nothing. It seems like that tendency, like this, oh, go out and protest, show them they're wrong, it's useful, but it's also in a box. It's not the limit of potential political action, and it only works until it doesn't. Especially like with BLM, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter. General Attorney Barr was looking to invoke sedition, against the protesters. I mean, Trump wanted to send the National Guard in to start killing people. The only reasons that didn't happen were respectively because he didn't win re-election and because General Milley pushed against Trump on this. I mean, in cases like that, peaceful protesting wouldn't work. I mean, it would actually it would actually end quite poorly for us, I think.
I hear that, but at the same time, I worry that violent protest often doesn't work and can be counterproductive as well. Like think of the French Revolution and other stuff. I think there's a strong argument to be made that peaceful protest, for better or worse, tends to work a little more of the time than violent reaction. And this is one of like the really, I think, tough tensions at the heart of the liberal project, which is like on a fundamental level, how do you deal with oppressive people? Because there isn't a good solution to this, because sometimes people are battle hardened and willing to pretty much do whatever to other people, and so peace doesn't really work as well. But at the same time, when you go to a violent situation, violence begets violence, and oftentimes this further radicalizes and makes people worse. Some types of peaceful protest are very good at turning the hearts and minds of almost everyone else against the oppressor. And I think that like sort of appeal to morality, appeal to not like killing innocent people has worked in a variety of contexts, from British India to some degree, to South Africa, to the United States. And I don't think that violent revolution works as often. But if you want to correct me, I'd love to hear something.
No, you're not incorrect at all. I don't have an issue with peaceful protests. They do tend to be more effective. My argument is that they're not the totality of our our political options. I think that sometimes you have to take further steps. A good example would be Reconstruction. After we won the Civil War, we should have rounded up every slave owner and political leader in the South and shot them in the back of the head, given them a slave's grave. But we didn't. We let them keep power, and because of that, they maintained that power. And there is a direct ideological line from what they believed before the Civil War to what they believe now, in terms of their political positions, the advocates. I mean everything that came out of the South after that. The Jim Crow laws, the poll taxes, the grandfather clause, everything. The Daughters of the Confederacy. It's a direct ideological descent. Now, the Germans were better about this. They did a much better job purging Nazism from their from their government after World War II. But they could have gone quite a bit farther as well, because there are quite a few neo-Nazi groups within the German military and police. Especially, apparently the military quite a bit. They have like paramilitary training camps they have out in the woods, where like dozens and hundreds of soldiers and police officers will, they'll, and that can be quite dangerous, I mean, brewing radicalism in the military is pretty much like the number one way of a military coup arising. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow or anything like that. I'm only saying that when you allow some of these beliefs to sit insidiously in a system, I feel like you are leaving a lot on the table. That sometimes it is acceptable to just flatly excise some types of behavior. We do that to an extent, after all. With protected classes in the U.S., you can't harass a person over protected characteristics, race, gender, blah blah, and that's good. But what that is a political decision, essentially, to treat racism differently from other kinds of being mean. We only arrived at that, and that was a controversial decision when it was made too. It was controversial when Canada added trans people to those lists of protections, back with Bill C-16. We're making political choices there to distinguish, essentially, conservative forms of political bias, and to recognize they're uniquely harmful. I know you can be left-wing and racist. I know, of course, protected classes protect men and white people as well, but the left, I don't think, makes racism or sexism or gender traditionalism its core messaging when it comes to these when these types of things. So all I'm saying is, we've already decided the paradox of tolerance. We've already decided where we sit on this. We clearly think that some types of behaviors through political weight are worse than others. We can push that a little bit farther, though, I think. Social media companies have their TOSs. They're more likely to ban you, if you're far right than far left, because far right types tend to be racist. This is a chilling effect, but I think it's a good one. Not just for their profit margins, but collectively for society. And if we can extend that there, legally, what about a clause which allows Congress members to be excised from their seat if they're found to be anti-democratic, that there's like some kind of judgment that can be made, not just for sedition or high treason, but if they're anti-democracy, if they disbelieve in the project of democracy, that could be something they could be tried for, specifically as political members. I'm not a legal expert, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I would be very worried about that, actually. And let me tell you why.
Mhm.
So I think democracy in all spheres of life might not necessarily be a good thing. I think, for instance, democracy on something like birth control would probably not poll very well. I think, for better or worse, it's the case that most people in the United States are somewhat socially conservative. I would argue that, broadly speaking, attitudes towards race are somewhat more conservative than people let on. And a result of that is, if you were to sort of create this like democracy in all spheres of life, I think you'd run into a situation where any bias that had the majority of support would ultimately be in control in large part of what would end up happening.
Oh,
Like,
just to clarify, sorry, just so there's no misunderstanding. By anti-democracy, I just mean that politically they're opposed to the concept of, like, majority rule, like or they're an autocrat. They're opposed to the systems that we use.
so what about something like minority rights, though, or thinking that some things are just fundamentally non-democratic? Like, because like democracy, I think the political scientists who came up with this pretty much said there's a tension between like majority rights, or sorry, majority rule and minority rights, and how do you really balance that sort of thing?
Well, if there were to be any such clause, couldn't it be determined through a court? I mean, right now you can try a congressperson for sedition. That would require a subjective assessment of their, aid to the enemy, or their attempt to prevent the inaction of a law of the United States. Any legal ruling will have 1,000 caveats, and you'll have precedent and judicial, opinions to take into consideration. But I think it's valid in concept. I don't think an anti-democracy person, a person who doesn't believe in democracy, should be able to be in federal government as a legislator. I don't think they should be able to. I think it should be as disqualifying as being a traitor.
So regarding this, I think the question is, are you willing to overturn democracy to preserve democracy? Is the question you're sort of asking yourself, right?
Is it overturning democracy to try
Okay, let's say
congressperson for
candidate.
sedition?
Let's. I think on some level you could argue it would be, whether or not that's like right or wrong or good or bad. Like, if there's an so if somebody runs their platform on the idea that too many things are democratic, democracy is a bad thing, and they get elected, isn't that the democratic decision making? Which sort of speaks to my issue of minority rights and what sort of things you want to protect from the sphere of democracy in general.
Well, at that point, I wouldn't care, right? If somebody wanted to be like, yeah, elect me and I'll bring slavery back. I mean, even if they were elected in a majority, I'd still want them to be ousted. It's
Yeah,
they
I
would
would want them to be ousted too.
yeah.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at, though. I'm saying I think in some ways we have anti-democratic provisions that are good. And I think these anti-democratic provisions, like preventing slavery from coming back, from having extremely high hurdles to punish people for like disagreement or dissent, like i.e. your First Amendment, like there's plenty of like nonsense that goes through our media sphere, but we have this protection because we don't want to make it easy to punish people who disagree. And in that same sort of vein, that's one of the big reasons why tax compliance is a little bit lower in the United States than in elsewhere, in the sense that we have the burdens extremely high to deal with the fact that oftentimes dominant regimes try to punish people who dissent through tax crimes and through other sort of shiftier doctrines.
Right. But I'm not talking about some clause where anyone who takes issue with any element of a democracy is, I mean, full on like autocrats. I think it should be considered extremely alarming that we had a near majority of people in our legislature essentially backed an attempt at enacting a coup in the 2020 election. I mean, we're in a position right now where the last election cycle was one in which we were vanishingly close to just not having a democracy anymore. So whatever path we're on right now, the one in which we have limitless tolerance for anti-democrats in power, is one which will end in our death. It'll be 4 or 8 or 12 years from now. Eventually, this system clearly allows for people to subvert it from within. And I don't think that should even be an option, really. I don't even think that should be on the table. That should be laws against that. If you're going to engage in behavior, I think all the people who didn't denounce the Jan 6 coup bullshit, or the
Yeah.
who won that or the other, should have just been ousted by default. The same way we did when the Civil War took place. We ousted the legislators from the southern states.